does it seem to you, Chase, that I don't know? I mean, it's like I almost feel like this is not about the net difference between what the Niners have offered and what Aiyuk's asking for. It feels to me like it has gotten personal. Like I'm sick of him. I'm sick of Aiyuk. And I'm talking about Shanahan. I'm sick of Aiyuk. I'm sick of this hold in. I don't respect the hold in. Schlereth ripped the hold in, said Aiyuk was soft. Schlereth is a buddy of the Shanahans.
Yep.
Do you think Schlereth is going to call him soft if he doesn't think that the Shanahans agree with him? Probably not. So, there's that. And when Kyle's been asked, hey, how do you differentiate a hold out versus a hold in? Kyle's just like, I don't know. He wants no part of it. But you can kind of tell it's like there's something. I don't know if it was Aiyuk saying that Jaden Daniels could take his game to the next level and all the song and dance about I'd love to be a commander and you're playing in this offense. I don't know if maybe Shanahan got rubbed wrong, but I just think that my read on it at least is that Aiyuk said and did all offseason what he felt like he needed to do to try to further his cause. Did it work or not? It hasn't worked thus far. But I get the sense that Aiyuk, despite all the things he said, despite the flirtations with the Commanders, but despite he texting, Tomlin and all the different things that he's done to try to, rattle the cage and create, waves, I think at the end of the day, he's still cool with coming back. I think Shanahan's the one who's not cool with having him back. I think Shanahan's done with him, even though Shanahan's about to march this guy out of town, despite the fact that to do so would probably hurt the 49ers Super Bowl chances. And Shanahan seems so stubborn, like he doesn't care either way. It's like, you know what? I'm marching this guy out of town anyway. That's my read on it. What am I too close to this? Am I seeing this right? I mean, I like Kyle Shanahan. I like John Lynch. But I get the feeling that Shanahan's the emotional one and Lynch is like the true adult, like grounded one. And that Lynch has his hands full just trying to keep Shanahan, off the reservation and away from the ledge. I don't know. I just get the sense that Shanahan is close to Aiyuk coming back.
That serves as a perfect segue to what I want to get to next, because you throw out a word, stubborn. And stubbornness. I think stubbornness is part of the reason why the San Francisco 49ers have come up short and they haven't won a Super Bowl yet, because Kyle Shanahan has been a very stubborn head coach in some really tense moments in games. He's been willing to adapt and adjust and change the way that he does things offensively from a pass protection standpoint, a schematic standpoint in the passing game, and just overall as being a head coach in the NFL. He is stuck in his ways. He's very proud of what he does. He comes from a family tree that's obviously really impressive with his father, Mike Shanahan, winning those Super Bowls with the Denver Broncos. Mike Shanahan back in the day was also very stubborn, and that's why it took him a long time to win those Super Bowls with John Elway on some of those really talented teams, and that's why he really came up short as a head coach before finally breaking through. And I think we're kind of seeing that ring true for Kyle Shanahan here. And that has been a common complaint among fans who understand that Kyle Shanahan has a really great offensive mind. The Niners would not be in the situation that they're in right now and have been without Kyle Shanahan leading this team. To go on this run of 4 NFC title games and 2 Super Bowl appearances in 5 years is a great run that any team in the National Football League would take. But Kyle Shanahan is a very stubborn guy. And I imagine he thinks back to that 2019 team that had the number 1 seed in the NFC. And he's saying, hold on. Everybody's trying to tell me that I can't win without Brandon Aiyuk because he's a great all-around wide receiver and a great deep threat. I took Jimmy Garoppolo to a Super Bowl, and at the time, my number 1 wide receiver was a player who we traded for at the deadline, in Emmanuel Sanders, and we were led by my schematic running game and a really good defense. Don't tell me that I can't get back to the Super Bowl without Brandon Aiyuk, because I can find ways to scheme things up. I can find ways to come up with play designs that will allow our offense to be successful. Look at what I've done and the numbers that my offense has put up with Mr. Irrelevant, Brock Purdy, as this team's starting quarterback. I can win without Brandon Aiyuk. And Kyle Shanahan is kind of old school in a way where, look, I think that Aiyuk has miscalculated some of the things that he's done this offseason. I think at times his approach to this has been a little bit petty and a little bit awkward. I don't think Aiyuk is the guy who wants to ruffle feathers. I don't think that Aiyuk is the guy who wants to take to social media and TikTok to try to leverage his situation and getting paid. But he's also looking at how these other wide receivers have gone about it. And he's saying, I probably have to do the same thing. And Kyle Shanahan's probably looking at this saying, look, if you showed up, if you didn't take to social media with all of these antics, we'd find a way to get a deal done. Look at what we've done with George Kittle, Fred Warner, Deebo Samuel, Nick Bosa. We'll find a way. Just don't cause unnecessary distractions for our football team. But that's the modern era with how things are. And while Kyle Shanahan is very tight with a lot of his players, he probably doesn't agree with the approach. So I do think that Kyle Shanahan and his stubbornness is kind of standing in the way of a deal getting done. And then you have to add on top of all of this that Parag is a very stiff negotiator. And Jed York might be looking at this offense saying, do we really want to give $28 million per year to a wide receiver when since the Christian McCaffrey trade, we've thrown the ball at the 32nd rate in the NFL? He probably has some hesitations. Parag negotiates one way and one way only. It's his way or the highway. And then Kyle Shanahan is stubborn. And all of this combined is why we're sitting here going into the second week of August, and Brandon Aiyuk is still without a deal, and there's no resolution.
I'm gonna share the screen here. I'm gonna show you this quote, the 33rd team. Now, this is on the Trey Lance thing from long ago. This is from Akash put this out on Twitter in August of 2023. But here it is. Here's Joe Banner with Ari Myrov, and he's talking on the 33rd team.
Trey Lance start on Sunday.
And you're going to hear Joe Banner, and he's talking about Lance here, but just forget that context. Just listen to what Banner says about Shanahan. And Banner worked with Kyle Shanahan. I think this is really interesting. Watch this little exchange.
Then there is the quarterback situation in San Francisco. And we all saw Trey Lance start on Sunday in the preseason game. And if you just looked at the box score, you probably thought, wow, he had such a good game. But if you watched it, you saw that his touchdown pass should have probably been an interception. You saw that he was sacked 4 times. It was not really a great game for Trey Lance. Joe, Trey has been in these trade chatter all off season long. Brock Purdy is ahead of schedule. They signed Sam Darnold in free agency. Do you feel like Trey's future is in San Francisco? How should they handle all of this here with the regular season approaching in a couple of weeks?
Yeah, so my answer is affected a lot by the fact that I worked with Kyle Shanahan. And he's obviously a really good coach. I worked with some really good offensive coordinators. He is as smart, if not smarter than any of them. But he's a very emotional guy, and he tends to be a fairly short-term thinker. And once you get in his doghouse, it's really hard to get out. But knowing the way Kyle is wired, it's really hard for me to picture how they could ever just get back into a really good, positive place supporting each other. So that leaves me with kind of a simplistic that if they could find another place and give Trey.
So there you go. That's basically the long and the short of it that I wanted to play there. It's just that he's a short-term thinker. He's an emotional guy. And when he kind of makes his decision, he locks in. And I think
keep in mind that Joe Banner was Andy Reid's right-hand man with the Eagles in the early 2000s when they went on that run of 4 straight NFC championship games, and he understands how Andy Reid operates and how Kyle Shanahan operates. And Joe Banner was known to be a very stiff negotiator as well, leading the front office for Philadelphia.
Yeah, so I mean, it just sounds to me like Shanahan is kind of pushed out of shape by Aiyuk, and even though Aiyuk is doing everything in his power to maybe come back to the 49ers or get this thing resolved, it seems like Shanahan is more interested in moving on. I'm not saying the 49ers don't have severe cap problems because of the impending contract that will be handed out to Purdy next year, but they can do any individual move they want to do. And it sounds to me like this has become, like they had their plan and they wanted to replace this guy and they tried to replace him in the draft. And I don't know. The whole thing is just so confounding from the standpoint of why didn't they trade him in April when there were so many seemingly more opportunities. Obviously, they must not have gotten their price. What do you make of the Diana Rossini story, which is that the Niners don't like what the Steelers are offering? The Niners now are in a position where I guess they feel like because Pearsall and Cowing are hurt, they need to get a receiver back. And they don't like either the receivers the Steelers have or the receivers the Steelers are offering them. And there's a lot of speculation that they were going to try to take some picks from Pittsburgh and float those picks to a third team for a receiver. I mean, now we're getting into unprecedented 3-way August trades involving players that never happened. So it's like, I don't even know what to say about this. You know what I mean? It's like we're projecting things that like literally never happened in the history of the league. So I don't know what kind of solid ground. What do you make of the Rossini report? And do you think that that's the next chapter here, that the Niners get, I don't know, James Daniels and Dan Moore and a pick for Aiyuk and then trade that pick to Cincy for Higgins or Denver for Sutton or who knows? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know what to make of all of this reporting because you have Adam Schefter saying the Niners are in no rush to make a deal. They're going to be patient about this because they want to make sure that if they trade away a second-team All-Pro, they want to get some really good value back. That's a report that I can lean on because that's how good businesses operate. You can't just trade away a second-team All-Pro who's 26 years old, whose numbers have exploded alongside Brock Purdy for 75 cents on the dollar, which is why if you were to make this trade, you should have done it in the lead up to the NFL draft, because right now it's going to be really hard to get equal value for a player like Aiyuk. And then you have Mike Silver, I believe, who reported that Kyle Shanahan didn't like that Aiyuk gave him a bro hug. I don't really believe that because it looked to me like Kyle Shanahan dapped up Aiyuk and kind of went in for the bro hug himself. I do believe our assessment that Kyle Shanahan's stubbornness might be in the way of making a deal or getting a deal done. And then you have Diana Rossini saying that the Niners don't really like the asking price, but that's the reality of the situation because here we are a few weeks into training camp and teams are trying to figure out what their offensive and defensive personnel is going to be on both sides of the football. And if an acquiring team brings in Brandon Aiyuk, you have to get him acclimated. If the Niners bring in some offensive linemen like a Dan Moore, they have to get those offensive linemen acclimated because Kyle Shanahan's scheme is very complex, especially for offensive linemen, given all of the pool blocking that they have to do and just the overall scheme difficulties. And then as part of this, I'm thinking, well, if the Niners want a wide receiver back and Pittsburgh is the destination, is Calvin Austin going to move the needle? I don't think so. To me, I think the Niners are in a good spot in that wide receiver room, even if they lose Aiyuk, but their offense still isn't going to be as good. And then the latter part of this, are the Niners trying to get some picks back and then kind of pull off an NBA-like trade in which you referenced, which we really don't see often, in which you bring in a third team where the Niners get, let's say, a second and third round pick back for Brandon Aiyuk, and then they flip that second and third and maybe another future pick, and they send that to the Las Vegas Raiders for Devontae Adams, who is very affordable this year and has a non-guaranteed contract following this year in which you could restructure that for an older player who right now might be better than Brandon Aiyuk, but in the future there's risk because he's 31 years old and he's unhappy with his situation with the Raiders. Could he be a target? Could T. Higgins, who's looking for a long-term deal with the Cincinnati Bengals, be a target as well? But then I think, well, hold on. If you want a player like T. Higgins, he's unhappy with Cincinnati because he's looking for a new deal. So you trade away Aiyuk because you don't want to pay him, but then you bring in T. Higgins and you're going to have to pay him to make this trade worth it. Some people have asked me, why don't you bring in George Pickens? Same situation. You bring in George Pickens, you're going to have to pay him a year or two down the road because he's going to be looking for a new deal. Now, will Higgins or Pickens be as expensive as Aiyuk's $28 million asking price? Maybe not. But the wide receiver market is going to continue to increase. It's going to continue to explode because it's a very important position. But as the NFL salary cap inevitably continues to go up, Player contracts will continue to go up, which also involves this part of the conversation. $28 million per year for Brandon Aiyuk a couple of years down the road actually might look like a good contract if he can stay healthy, he can continue to produce, because the wide receiver market will continue to be on the uptick. And I know that the Niners next year are like $35 million over the cap, but they have the most cap space in the NFL right now, like $55 million. And there are ways to massage the cap and pull off salary cap gymnastics. And that's why I'm so perplexed. Get this deal done. Just go up a little bit from that $26 million per year number. It's so telling what TJ Houshmandzadeh, who's Aiyuk's wide receiver coach, is saying. He's saying Aiyuk wants to take less to play with the Niners. He just wants 28 instead of the 32 that other teams are offering, but the Niners won't move off that $26 million per year number. It's just the overall stubbornness of this organization that's really head-scratching. And for me, fans have the right to be completely outraged by the situation, because you cannot blow this Super Bowl window that you have right now. And if you blow the Super Bowl window, the Niners and this stretch, this era, are going to go down as one of the biggest what ifs in the history of the NFL.